Welcome to Working Dogs and Whiskey. I'm Sean White. I'm here with my co-host Jonathan Moses, where we have open and honest conversations as we dive into the world of dog training.
Let me free your mind, your mind.
All right, we'll skip the whole banter about what we've been up to. I don't think anybody gives a shit.
Yeah.
So,
No, we know what we've been doing.
yeah. So the whole point what we're getting into today is, from my perspective, is pretty much a combination of social media, the pitfalls of social media, right? And then I guess you could say, confusion or disparities of defining the quadrants and what you're operating in. So, if you want, John, just give us a little background, set the stage on what I'm referring to.
Yeah. So me and Sean have been playing around with different content and putting out educational videos and different ways of doing that. And we were putting out a lot of like how-to videos and tutorials and like live training examples. But one way we're learning to teach and have fun and kind of put important information out there is through different videos paired with different memes. So there's this Denzel Washington meme that was going around. If you've seen it, it's pretty funny. But Sean put it on a couple of videos and I put it on one. And essentially what the video is referring to is we're talking about negative reinforcement. And the original goal of the post was to point out how a lot of people have a negative outlook on dogs, or they take it personally. That's probably the better way to say it. When dogs try and bite in certain situations and they think that dog's holding a grudge or evil or however they take it. But a lot of times the dog is just trying to escape the pressure. The same way I was using negative reinforcement to try and get him to do a behavior, he's just looking for an outlet or a way to shut the pressure off. So he took a shot at me. I would like to preface that video is like a year and a half old. There's a lot more safety procedures in place now. But it apparently sparked up a pretty big controversy and got some people talking. It's been shared a bunch. But it got some good conversation going, which is the goal of what we're doing. Like, we want to open up the community and kind of talk and get these conversations going. But the video really sparked a lot of debate between people, between the use of positive punishment and negative reinforcement and where that line gets kind of blurred. So that's been debated back and forth a little bit. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's what the whole point of us putting ourselves out there publicly and putting these posts out is, to get other people's opinions and look at different points of view. So we just kind of want to talk about that a little bit, but that's the background for the post and what we're about to get into. And I'll probably tag a link in the podcast episode. If anybody wants to go look at it, you can go click on it and look at the post.
AKA he's trying to self-promote himself, but
100% getting those views up.
Right? I guess. So for the listeners and everything, just answer a few questions for me so we can actually get a visual on what we're talking about. So, so first of all, what was the breed of dog you were trying to train, and what was the objective of the training scenario?
So it's a South African Borbal, and any trainer who has tried to work with a mature Borbal who was not properly socialized or raised, everyone I've talked to who's been in that situation has very similar stories of temperament and how they react and their personalities. The goal of the training session was elderly woman had gotten him. She wasn't able to handle him. She was having some issues. I don't believe at that point he hadn't bitten anyone yet, but there were signs that he was kind of progressing that direction and gaining confidence in that. So typically the way I would handle this now is I would walk them through how to train their own dog, how we apply pressure, reward. We would start loading markers. This dog would refuse food. He's never taken food in public in his life in the 3 years that she's had him. So that wasn't an option. We tried building motivation for a little bit, just wasn't happening. Even in different environments at home, he was not comfortable with it outside of his kennel. Like I said, just wasn't properly socialized. So at that point, it kind of left us one option where she just wanted to be able to have him sit or lay down when her son came in the house or before he went in and out the door. Because he was just causing issues. He was becoming very bold, and his ability to, for lack of better words, punk people or intimidate by barking, snapping, growling, and lashing out. So in the video, we start by going through, and I think we did a little bit with the sit, and I'm just trying to essentially read the dog. Like I'm applying pressure and trying to read and see what he's doing. And I'm just going through different positions. At this point, he hadn't really shown me anything to the effect of he was willing to bite me. He was uncomfortable, obviously, but I
Right.
hadn't seen like clear intent yet. So I'm just going through, and essentially what you're seeing is me making the read on the dog. How comfortable is he with pressure? Right before the incident in the video where I go to use the pressure and he lashes at me, I'd actually use a little bit of downward pressure, his elbows flexed, and I release the pressure to start guiding him towards, hey, that's what we want. That's how we stop the pressure. So that's a little bit of background on what we were trying to accomplish in the session.
Okay. And I think for me, like I've been thinking about this a lot just because the video is gaining traction. I think part of it we were trying to figure out why that specific video. But and obviously I'm a little bit older, so social media is kind of a foreign territory for me. But I think that's one of the things that like makes me hesitant to post on social media is because yeah, what you described sounds a lot better than what's shown in the actual video. So when
Yeah,
you watch the video, it's only a maybe a what at best 7 to 10 second clip, if that.
if
And
that. Yeah.
yeah, so what you don't see is like the context behind it because you only have a short window to present to people, regardless, for it to gain the traction that you would want it to gain. So um, so what you see in the video is pretty much John just applying pressure, the downward part of it, and then the dog reacts, right? And good
Yep.
on you for reading the situation. I know you're experimenting. Um, and in the video, you
Hey,
can
I
see
can say
where
right now I wouldn't do it again.
yeah, no, I would hope not. Yeah, that's if you watch the video, it's like a lion trying to go after him for people that don't know what a borobo is. But yeah, so you're applying the downward pressure, and you pause the pressure because you see the dog's essentially what we call loading up, or he's giving you a warning sign that he's about to aggress, and then he makes an attempt after you, and you apply upward pressure to gain distance and kind of suppress some of that undesirable behavior. So, but what's only seen is essentially, again, just downward pressure, a pause, the dog comes at you, and then you apply pressure to get him away from you. And then the dog settles into, I believe, a sit, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Settles into a sit and kind of backs away.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that's the entire video. So, and that's more of what I was getting at as far as setting the stage. And this is why again I like social media and I don't because people's attention spans are so fucking small now that it's hard to capture everything. And I wish, because I believe there is like a full video of you experimenting with, pressure in the sit and
Yeah. I
everything.
think I've got like a 4 or 5 minute video. Yeah.
Right. But obviously you
And
can't
essentially,
post
as
that.
soon as we found that threshold, yeah, no one's gonna watch the whole thing. And the training plan, at that point, there was no plan. Like, he didn't have any pre-established behaviors. He knew nothing. He was uncomfortable in a new environment. He didn't take reward. So this was very much on the fly kind of learning, and just trying to see what his thresholds were. Because a lot of people will bring you their dogs, especially in the pet world, and say, "Hey, he's willing to bite or he's aggressive," but typically it's misdiagnosed or they just see a form of reactivity and you don't really know to what extreme it is. So I was going through and I was aware that it was a possibility, but once I saw it in action, I said, "Okay, he's willing to commit to this. These are the next steps." And we immediately kind of changed paths. We did end up getting the dog into a down, and we just took our time and took a different approach. Uh, and it was not easy. Like none of this was enjoyable for the dog. He's very stressed outside of his environment, and the biting is a byproduct of that. Uh, but it's tricky, and like you said, social media shows a very short clip. Maybe at some point I'll post the whole video. Although I doubt the same 40,000 people would ever watch it. It's not as entertaining because it quickly became less exciting. It immediately dulled down, and that's what good training is. It's slow, it's steady, it's slow progress. So I might put the whole video out there as well, but I doubt people will see it.
Well, I mean, in that regards, I think the ones that actually care about training will watch it, and it's going to be unfortunately a small demographic that will. But I mean, personally, I would, just because there's a lot of debate about this apparently. Um,
Yeah.
and going back to that, the whole point of this is, and we'll get into it as far as the specific comment that triggered this conversation. And again, I think you already mentioned it. This isn't an attack on a specific individual or anything. I don't know the guy. It's just something you and I have just been talking about, and part of that or that triggered conversation is us defining what negative reinforcement is. And I get it. There's the standard definition, textbook definition, and just like anything else, there's an individual interpretation of um, any definition. So if you could just define what negative reinforcement is, or in regards to that video, like where was it being applied and all of that.
So negative reinforcement in that video. So like I said, the dog had no established behaviors. He didn't have any obedience prior to this. So negative reinforcement. The negative part is the removal of pressure, and the reinforcement is I'm trying to increase the likelihood of something happening. So in that video, when I'm applying the downward pressure, what I'm looking for is he feels discomfort. The direction of the leash is giving him some directional, or the pressure of the leash is giving him directional information, saying, hey, bend, go this direction. I already kind of established that the rep prior to, where I got that little bit of an elbow bend and release pressure. But I take the pressure, he starts to go with it, and I release the pressure. So negative reinforcement in layman's terms is escape training. Something uncomfortable happens. You do an action that I deem as what I was looking for, and I release the pressure. So that becomes your way to escape the pressure, right? And that's all I was doing. I didn't have a way to motivate this dog. There was no luring, uh, nothing prior to this, so it was escape training.
Okay. And a couple of things I wanted to touch on with that, like for me, watching that specific video, right? So if we're talking negative reinforcement, um, the negative part is the aversive, and I kind of leave it at a vague statement because aversive to a dog could be, it's up to their interpretation of what aversive is. In that specific video, obviously, the pressure being implemented uh, is what would be the aversive in that situation. And for me, the reinforcement aspect is the release of the pressure. Okay, this is what got you out of it, right? And the dog, as
Yep.
repetitions continue, the dog understands, okay, it's pretty much a race at that point. When he starts, all the cues build up. When I present my leash in a downward motion, he says, I can beat that, right? After established sets of repetition. And it's no different than, for me, I use like, my son does, he was doing boxing for a little bit, and a certain hand motion he had no understanding of, right? So you raised your hand and swung at him. Initially, he wouldn't really move, maybe a little bit, but he didn't understand it. After repetitions of him getting swung at, through practice or sparring, he understood really quickly that when I see that setup, that telegraph, I should try to, it becomes a race now. I have to get out of the way, right? And as
Yes.
he became
Yep.
successful, he started becoming more enthusiastic about boxing, or sparring and stuff like that. But um, so in the same context as your video, what I see is pretty much what was being applied was slow, steady pressure, like you said, in a direct manner, going downward to guide the dog into the position so we can achieve the desired behavior. Now, the unfortunate part, going back to what we were saying earlier, is that there's no context in that specific video. So nobody knows that you're experimenting or sampling with pressure and just seeing, gauging a threshold essentially is what I got knowing the background. And
Yeah.
obviously the dog's tolerance wasn't quite there. And so he chose the
Yes.
different path, right? Instead of compliance.
Yeah.
Um, but I think now going into the comment, I guess, because there's a lot of comments in there. I think I replied to like one of them or something like that, where they were saying you were using positive punishment versus negative reinforcement, and it's weird to me that that's the big deal. Like I understand terms are very important in training, but it was just weird to me that this video that was supposed to be comical, basically, just to add some
Yeah.
comedic relief, becomes this giant debate on terminology, and we're like, really, that's the video? But
Yeah.
but yeah, so I think what we're gonna talk about more of is defining, at least for us, negative reinforcement versus positive punishment, and when that's established. So um, we both gave our perspectives of negative reinforcement. I guess explain to me why that wouldn't be positive punishment then.
So, positive punishment is adding pressure to decrease the likelihood of behavior. Like that's textbook definition, right? Like you can look that up anywhere and that's what it'll tell you. But when I look at it personally and what positive punishment means to me, when I correct my dog, or even with my children, for example, if there has to be an established behavior, something that's known. So if I correct you, it's to decrease the likelihood of you not listening or to decrease the likelihood of you choosing to do something else. For me, the prerequisite is you know what you should be doing instead, or I've established a behavior that has enough repetition that you should default to. So if I were to tell my dog to sit and they continued standing or they were jumping, then I could apply a correction, and I would probably still use directional information. Like if I need you to sit, I'm probably just going to pop up on the leash out of habit. And it gives the dog more feedback. It's more lines of communication. But even if I were to just pop you in the head or pop a leash sideways or tap you with an e-collar, something that didn't have directional information, I would still expect that you default into the correct behavior. But that's all predicated upon the fact that you know what I'm asking. So for me, there has to be an established behavior, and I'm correcting an unwanted behavior.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's one of the biggest things I learned my time in Lackland was Doc Hilliard gave us or Dr. Stuart Hilliard gave us a little crash course seminar one morning about why our dogs don't react in the way that we want them to, and why positive punishment isn't effective in our training system. And it's because essentially we didn't establish directional guidance with the leash. A lot of it wasn't installed correctly. And what I mean by that is in two separate contexts. One, I will teach the dog how to lure and everything else, to follow a ball in that situation. Or if you're dealing with family dogs, traditionally speaking, you use food to guide the dog into a sit, right? And then separately, though, in a separate session for the benefit of the dog, I will use strictly, leash pressure and the alleviation of pressure. So negative reinforcement, right? So whether that's through a prong collar, a correction collar, or slip lead, whatever manner of pressure, but I'm going to apply an aversive separate, right? I'll still reward the dog, um, you know, basically using the elements of knee popo, right? Um, but then, and I'll reward the dog once he follows through with pressure. What that does, though, is it creates a setting to where what you were talking about, where if the dog doesn't do what I, you know, commanded it to do, I have a way to compel the dog into the behavior. But it understands what that aversive is, the signal of, oh, okay, then he really means sit, right? So, and it's it's used for basically in the for foreign scenarios where I've used it most, where the dog maybe is more interested in the environment, vice, what I'm telling it to do for whatever reason. But like I said, I have a way to compel the dog into a behavior. But the biggest part of that is the distinguishing lines is the dog fluid in the versive communication, right? So
Yep.
does the dog understand what that means? And I think going back to that video, which I encourage a lot of people to watch after listening to this, and it'll make a lot more sense. Even in the comment that I put, for me, a easy way to understand, or a simplistic way to understand that gray area between negative reinforcement and positive punishment, because to the untrained eye, it's just pressure. It's just aversive, right?
Yeah.
So even in how you're administering the pressure in that video, it's very methodical, it's gradual, incremental, right? Downward pressure. For me, there's not any good trainers that I know that if they're going to use positive punishment, they're going to sit there and try to ease the dog into it. No, it's pretty swift, and it's
Yeah.
it's in and it's out, and it's applied once the dog understands again what the aversive means. So watching that video for me by design, has to be, it looks more of a teaching moment than, a correction, in my opinion. So, and
Yeah.
I think that's the big disparity for me from negative reinforcement to positive punishment. And it's just an easy measurement tool.
Yes. And I know something we talk about a lot. I mean, you've had this conversation with dog trainers in general, is the timing of a correction. Like you said, it's usually very swift, quick. It's meant to be disruptive and
Mhm.
to essentially stop a behavior. Like I've never, very rarely, or like you said, in good trainer, I don't see a lot of slow pressure when it comes to positive punishment. It's usually a very swift, quick thing because again, it's supposed to disrupt a behavior and guide the dog back to what they should be doing. And that's definitely a big takeaway. And I see where the confusion can be at. And this is why we want to talk about this, like open this up and get different perspectives. Maybe there's certain moments where somebody's got an experience out there where they do say, hey, I'm using positive punishment in this moment, but with this kind of dog in this situation, it is slow. So it's a possibility, but I think this is where we really want to open this up and kind of get some feedback and hear different questions. Like you said, please go watch the video, comment what you think on it, and just give your different experiences and situations. But for us, that's definitely the prerequisite. Like there has to be an established behavior before I can correct my dog to do something, because that correction is going to be very swift. And at that point, it would almost be unfair. Like if I had taken that dog and I gave him a firm pop down without any guidance, where I'm trying to teach him and show him how to escape this pressure, it's very unfair to that dog. And it could have had a very different effect. It could have been a much more extreme reaction. So it is definitely a fine line when you're talking about the two, positive punishment versus negative reinforcement. And I know one thing we did see in the comments is someone said, well, you're doing both. The dog's in a sit and you're applying positive punishment to get him out of that sit and then going into negative reinforcement. I think part of that is just lacking the background information of what happened prior to. Like this wasn't an established training session where we already had targeted behaviors and he knew certain things. I wasn't trying to decrease the likelihood that he would sit. I was just trying to find thresholds. So I definitely want to hear more from people in the community and their thoughts on that. But I know that's how I would outline it for sure. I'm pretty much aligned with your views on that, with the meaning and kind of the prerequisites for each. For positive punishment, my dog has to know what's expected and it has to have a thorough understanding. For negative reinforcement, for that dog, it was the first thing we tried because the only form of motivation we had. And
Right.
two very different outcomes.
Yeah, and there's two things that I want to circle back to. I know you just mentioned it, and earlier you mentioned motivation, and it's one of the things that I'm thinking about putting into a seminar. You and I have been working on like somewhat of a scaling system on basically, how do we train the dog? Like you said, this dog doesn't have a lot of motivation for food, toys, um, what would be another one? Affection and things like that. You know, the
Yeah.
traditional route that we kind of sample with that borable. And so, and those are the traditional realms that we would use to motivate a dog. And I'll touch on it, I'll give some of it away. But like motivation for me, I think we often misconstrue that with positivity for some reason, right? And so, and it's just not how life works. It's not how training works for dogs. Motivated, you can be very motivated by something you don't enjoy, right? In fact, that's how most people are motivated to go to work is the
Yeah.
idea of being, poor or poverty is a strong source of motivation to go to a job that they don't like, right? So when you transfer that over to dogs, you try to do something that you would in a positive manner and a positive approach first, always. But at a certain point, you have the pressure of time, you know, especially for that dog, he's a pet dog. Um, so you have to produce results within a timely manner, which is negative reinforcement in and of itself, but that's a separate podcast on time. Um,
Yeah.
but so you try to trigger another source of motivation, which is through an aversive, right? And maybe we can re-bridge that gap of once the dog finds its advantages through the aversive, now maybe he'll accept food. We've seen that for sure. But um,
Yeah.
but I really wanted to touch on like the motivation aspect because like I said, it gets misconstrued with positivity and that's just not always the case. Like you can make a dog very motivated
Yeah.
by aversives. But
Yeah. We definitely saw a lot of that in the comments too. There was quite a few comments that said, "Hey, that's not negative reinforcement because reinforcement means the dog would enjoy it."
hmm,
Like you said, reinforcement, that's not the definition of it. It just means it increases the likelihood of something. It can be very adversive and be reinforcing. It does not mean enjoyment. So, and I know the conversations me and you have had, and I hear a lot more people talking about now is how important terminology is in the dog training space, and how we all kind of need to be a little bit more on the same page so we can effectively communicate with each other and have more of these conversations and discussions. And I think because that is kind of flowing in and out of the dog training community right now, and that conversation in and of itself is being had, that honestly might explain why that post was it blew up the way it did because people are trying to define their terminology, which again is why we do this. We want to open it up. We want to make sure we're all on the same page. This is not an attack against anybody. We want to make sure that we're communicating effectively. So we're trying to give our definitions, and again, would love to hear everybody else's. But yeah, reinforcement is not always a positive thing, and motivation is not always positive. That's one of the first things we cover in our go homes when we're training clients, when we're training people. There are a bunch of ways to motivate a dog.
yeah. And I think what you were saying earlier, because when I was sitting here, I was like, why were we talking about terminology? Like for real, what's the importance of it? And you definitely touched
Yeah,
on it earlier. For people that enthusiasts or just even aspiring dog trainers, it really, for me, it sets the tone for the human, which is the catalyst of any training, right? Good or bad, it's always from the human. And so I know when I first started out in canine, I damn near failed the principles of conditioning and all that, which kind of covers um, negative reinforcement, the quadrants and all that, right? And I didn't really understand it, obviously, when I started out for like the first probably 2 to 3 years. And then, well, really, probably the first 7 years, to be honest. Um, I didn't truly understand it. But once I understood the difference just between what we were saying, negative reinforcement and positive punishment alone, it sets a different mind frame. And you touched on it earlier as far as being fair to the dog. And for me, knowing that negative reinforcement is pretty much most times, right? Not all the time, but most times is utilized in the learning phase or the teaching phase rather for the dog. Vice's a proofing phase, which I kind of view positive punishment is in the more of the proofing phase, meaning the dog understands the behavior, understands what the aversive signal means, and is reflexive and good with it. Vices in negative reinforcement, the dog doesn't have much history, established history, and repetition. So, uh, what it did for me is, and a lot of other trainers at Lackland just alone, was everybody says I'm very patient with dogs, and I don't think so. I'm very impulsive by nature. Like that's why I'm about to get a financial counselor and all this stuff, advisor. But because I just like to do stuff. Um, but I don't think I have patience with dogs. I think I have understanding, right? And so understanding the
Yep.
quadrants creates that, and I think that's what constitutes for better training, um, fluidity in training, and what people could argue is patience. But when you understand the terminology and knowing what the dog is perceiving as, you know, reinforcement and not. But and like you said, reinforcement, it's not always positive. Uh it's not always what people perceive as, the dog likes what's going on, essentially. The dog learns to understand, just like from our end, how to avoid or how to react to certain, aversives or whatever the case may be. But again, everything goes back down to understanding and then timing. Um,
Yes.
and that's the biggest thing that I see looking at other trainers, especially going into the sport community, which you warned me about, that not every sport trainer is, the best trainer. Um, but like even watching them using their timing, relief of pressure, after the behavior, seconds after the behavior has been achieved, that's completely different information to the dog versus what you think you're teaching. So, but one of the other comments I wanted to address, because I don't want to target it or equate it to one person individually, because I just went
Yeah.
through and was looking at other comments. So this one, I want to get your perspective on it first, and then I'll address it head on. But one of them mentioned
Yeah.
something about you using the pressure, right? And you relieved the pressure before
Hmm.
the dog went into the down, right? So he was saying basically you're
Oh
teaching
yeah.
the dog to bite. So if you want to address that?
All right. That dog was like predisposed to biting when he felt uncomfortable. That's why he was there. Uh, I just needed to see what his threshold was for to establish boundaries, essentially. And I understand, like, yes, it is reinforcing the fact that I moved out of the way while we're going into the down. But that is where theory and practical application do not line up because that dog was 150 plus pounds. Yeah, I'm not standing there to take that bite when I know I can just reevaluate and change up my technique a little bit and we'll still accomplish the down. Uh, so that was a funny comment because I do understand where it's coming from. But I even reached out to a couple of buddies of mine outside of this, and I asked, and they're like, "Man, fuck that!" Like, just to be frank, they're like, "Fuck that!" They're like, "I've been in that situation." They're like, "You reacted better than I did." They said because you at least thought to go to upward pressure and create distance. They're like, "I would have done something out of pocket, like something out of character in that situation because the emotion and the reaction takes over." So I think anyone who's been in that situation with a dog that's an actual threat, like I legitimately feel if that dog grabbed me with intent, he'd break an arm or a leg, like without a doubt. He's a powerful dog, and he's an adolescent in that video. He's even stronger and more powerful now. But yeah, no, that was a funny one to me because I'm like, okay, it's different than if my Jack Russell came at me while I'm applying this. But okay, hey, stop that, as opposed to 150 pounds of dog. So yeah, that's my take on it. What's your thoughts on that? Because we haven't
Dude,
actually talked about that one together, I don't think.
yeah. So I read that one and I was, well, you know me. At first, I was like, "What the fuck do you think he was gonna do? Just stand there and take a bite?" Like And for me, I mean, I've been bit too many times, so I'll avoid it. Even the Jack Russell, oh, fuck it, we'll reset. I'll get out the way. So I'm not as bold, dude. Um,
Yeah,
but but no, but I think the other part too is that people don't understand how negative reinforcement works. It's not a single learning event, most cases, right? So
yeah,
you have a little wiggle room and a little room for forgiveness and for error most times. And I'm like, one repetition of
yeah,
you getting out the way doesn't mean, and the fact that you continued the pressure after, when he was providing forward aggression towards you, and he settled,
yeah,
he realized he wasn't going to win that fight. And yeah, maybe you didn't get him into the down, but that doesn't, constitute that every time you try to apply pressure into the down that he's immediately going to do that. Like, I don't think he was taught
yeah.
that, in that one moment. But yeah, no, I was like, what
No,
the
if I did
hell?
it 20 more times, maybe
Right.
he'd probably say, okay, now biting is the way out. Like you said, that one moment did not, like, by the end of the session, he was laying down. Like I said, I just had to
Exactly.
change my approach, and we switched a couple of things up, and he was fine. But in that moment, yeah, those comments are definitely funny, and like a lot of them, there's certain comments I did respond back to, and I thought it was just a misunderstanding in terminology. Some people gave how they do techniques on an elevated surface for situations like that, and those are all things I kind of look at and I put in my tool bag, and I'm like, okay, good to know. Like maybe I'll find that dog where that situation works. I do have different procedures in place now. That dog uh, showed me a lot the more I worked with him. And
Yeah.
for some reason, I had a really bad string of dogs like this past February. All of them were like 120 plus with very similar issues for board and trains. And the safety procedures came very quickly. Like I was like, all right, here's the protocol for this now. So it's one of those things you live and learn. And one of the big things I wanted to point out too, and the original point of the post, and I think I kind of talked about it when we first begun. That dog did not do that out of spite. He didn't hate me or have anger or grudge against me or anything like that. He was simply uncomfortable, and his genetics and his personality and the makeup of his environment told him, okay, I feel discomfort. I want to try and find my own way out of this pressure. So I'm going to lash out and try something. It is not, it's not personal. He just wanted to escape the pressure. I was trying to show him one way to escape it, and he's trying to figure out his own way to escape pressure. That's all that was happening. I just needed to know where that threshold was at and what the likelihood of him trying it was. Once we established that, like I said, we moved on. We achieved everything we needed in the session. But I definitely want to address that. I like you said, when you kind of talked about it a little bit, when you see trainers continuing to apply pressure after an incident like that,
Hmm.
it's unfair to the dog. Like like I said, he was uncomfortable. I knew it was a possibility going into it. I'm not going to react emotionally and be upset. I'm not going to sit here and tell you my heart wasn't fucking pounding. If I let the video play for a second or two after that, you actually see he backs up and I reach for my sleeves. I'm like, okay, let me roll up my sleeves. I check my arm and I'm like, okay, shit, I'm good. And I took a
Yeah.
deep breath and we went back into it. But I didn't sit there and continue to just hold pressure because, oh, he's trying to dominate me or I'm upset. At that point, it's just irrational and emotional. And it's like you said, it's a different experience for the dog at that point. We just went back into the session very calmly with very clear communication, and we accomplished what we needed to accomplish.
Yeah. And I think at that point, like you said, that's a critical point of where the dog is no longer applying forward aggression. He's in the sit, and he's calm. He's realizing that that wasn't as advantageous as he thought it was going to be. Produce, and I think a lot of what dogs learn outside of that is, okay, I don't have an advantage by biting, right? So we address, you had to shift gears as you often do in dog training, and you address that issue of forward aggression, and that's off limits. And I think maybe that, if you wanted to argue, could be the positive punishment aspect of the dog is, we're decreasing the likelihood of you biting, right? When that happens, pressure is reapplied and you're no longer, allowed to do that. right? The other part, though,
Yep.
is I think there's a very thin line in which we teach dogs to bite. And I've seen it done. I've been guilty. I'll say I've been guilty of it. I can't think of a specific moment, but where a dog um shows or demonstrates forward aggression, right? The dog goes into a passive position, i.e., a sit or a down, or whatever. But because, like you said, the emotional correlation, and some trainers feel they have to be dominant or alpha, whatever the hell they want to call it, and they continue the pressure, right? So now the dog, and I think this is where humans and dogs, we ruin the relationship, because that dog backed away. He got his distance away from you. He's just as afraid of
Yeah.
you, for applying the pressure going into the
Exactly.
down, because he doesn't understand.
Yeah.
And he's distanced himself from you. He feels safe. And if you had continued the pressure, it probably would have produced a bigger reaction, because now he has
Yes.
no understanding, of what gets the pressure alleviated, because his whole objective is to avoid the pressure, right? And
Yeah.
even though, sure,
Exactly.
you can say, when you applied the pressure into the down and the dog reacted, because there is a moment where you read the behavior very well. The dog paused and you saw that he was preparing to bite, and you relieved the pressure in order to get into a more advantageous
To,
position
to
to
get the
counter
fuck out
that.
the way. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Um,
Yeah.
so it's coming. So there's no reasonable person would stand there and be like, "Fuck it, I'm gonna take it for the team." I'm gonna show this dog. So,
Yeah.
um, so yeah, you reposition yourself, in which by default, you had to relieve the pressure, because you're not going to lean down with a dog that's going to most likely bite you in the face if it could. And then,
Yeah.
you set up. And once the dog committed to it, now this becomes a separate learning event, right? We have ditched the down. And I think that's the the big dispute or confusion between the one comment that triggered this conversation, is that
Yeah.
now what are we doing? Because the down is no longer achievable. That's off the table, right? Now we're addressing the fact that you're being forward aggressive. And how do we address that?
Yeah.
Well, we're going to use the tools. We're going to use, aversion, to get the dog to just comply in whatever manner he deems suitable. Like, I've had dogs that
Yeah.
have been leaping at me, trying to bite me, and we apply pressure, and the dog just stands there. And as long as he's not going
Yep.
forward, that is the position. That's fine. The pressure will be relieved. He tries again. We reapply pressure, and we kind of play that little dance. And then the dog understands, if I just stand here. For your dog, the Borbal, he gained distance,
Mm.
about 6 feet or whatever leash distance, and then he goes into a sit, and your relief of pressure
Yep.
says, "Hey, look, that's good enough for the forward aggression." But the forward aggression of itself is unproductive, and it actually just caused more aversion. And then the settling,
Yeah.
right, is what got him out of it. And so I think
Yes.
that's a lot of it, what people get confused on. But what's your take on it?
No, no, you're spot on. Like that's an entirely separate learning event. Like you said, I'm not gonna stand there and take the bite. But at the
Mhm,
same time, there was something learned in that moment. And again, I feel like if we empathized with the dogs more, or a little bit more sympathetic to their situation, we would have like you said, understanding or patience, whatever you want to call it,
mhm,
uh, for the dog. Because, like you said, in that moment, he was just as worried and as nervous as I was. Like he gained his distance, we both reset, and then we came back to the situation, and we both tried to find our advantage. I decided I didn't need to be that close when we
right.
went for the downward pressure, and I added some distance and a barrier between us as we did it, and he felt more comfortable going to that down at that point. So it's important to look at their emotions, uh, and that sequence of coming at me and then the pressure coming on, completely separate event to trying to achieve the down. You'd have to have so much repetition for him to make that correlation that biting relieves the downward pressure, because by the time we did the next rep, he was in the down. So that's definitely a good point. It was a completely separate thing, but I'm glad we addressed it. Something
So,
I kind of wanted to talk about,
mhm.
which I thought was kind of funny with the entire post. I think there's only one person, and I won't even acknowledge that comment. No one disagreed with how the training was done. It was strictly what quadrants we were moving in and out of. Or like
Right.
you said, some people were like stand there and take the bite, but the problem wasn't with the pressure.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think it's funny how we do get hung up on terminology and we go back and forth. But me and you talk about it a lot. Like sometimes the theory of dog training is a little bit more complicated than the actual practical application, or you can go
Yeah.
down more of a rabbit hole. Uh, which I always just think is kind of funny because no one said, "Oh no, you shouldn't have used the pressure." They just said, "Hey, that pressure was called this, and then it changed to that."
Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
which is, I don't know. I just want to talk about that a little bit. I just find that kind of funny. I think it means we're on the right track though, and we're having the right conversations.
for sure. One, I think a lot of people didn't argue against the pressure because that's a very human nature thing to do with an animal that
Yeah,
big, and especially
yeah,
like one of the benefits of the 7-second video or 10-second video, however long it is that within like 5 of those seconds, you see the dog coming after you. So nobody's sitting there
yeah,
like, "Oh, we should have used food," and all that. Like, people that know you understand that you probably already tried to exercise that, element of training. And then other
yeah.
people are just looking at him as this giant aggressive dog, which in a way he's not, like you said, he's just
No,
not understanding how to he's trying to find his advantage out of pressure and through genetics. Of course, he's going to sample that um, by
yeah,
biting, which, good for him. Um, and then it's on you to educate him, which you did, that that's not productive. And I think those are like the core
yeah,
elements of what was going on there. But uh, the other thing too, I know that video was what, like a year and a half ago or something like that.
yeah. It's like a year and a half old.
So if you do remember, how did you readdress it? Because I think a lot of us will post stuff like that, and I'm going somewhere with this,
Yeah,
but we make these posts and stuff like that, and we kind of cover like, yeah, I went back and everything worked out, and there's that missing link of like, well, what happened?
what
Because I
actually
know for
happened?
me, I would have assumed after the dog tried to bite you, oh, you did something probably way out of context of what you actually did. So, um, if you remember anything of how you readdressed it, whether it was gradually.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure the only thing I switched up, I changed it. His second session was the most dramatic change in the fact that he had a muzzle on,
Right.
uh, and a long line. I could just gain more distance. But in the immediate situation, I think what I did was I essentially just positioned myself where there was a chair in between us. And we have like these low, like lounge kind of chairs, like the black and tan ones in the front.
Yeah.
I essentially had a barrier in between us. I had the leash under,
Okay.
and I applied pressure. And one, it gave us distance between each other. I was much further out on the leash.
Hmm.
He, just like I know the barrier is there to protect me, he knows it's there to protect him. So he
Okay.
felt a lot
Yeah.
safer because I wasn't right in there was no social pressure. I wasn't hovering over him. So once we did that, I did a couple more reps of you bend your elbows, I release the pressure. And then I held the pressure. He bent. He paused again, but this time he relied on the reps we had just done. He said, okay, I'm just going to keep bending. And then I released the pressure and he laid down. I think we did that probably 6 or 7 times. And then by the end of it, I walked out in front of the chair. Like I could have moved back or we could have gone back to that same point. But from the end of the leash, if the pressure moved down slightly, he just laid down.
Good.
Like it was nothing crazy. Nothing extremely aversive had to happen where I'm like helicoptering this dog to get it down. Like that wouldn't have been effective.
Jesus.
So
Yeah.
I just put a barrier between us, made him feel a little bit safer. I made myself feel a little bit safer in the situation. which is just as important as making sure the dog feels safe and comfortable. That way you don't get emotional or act irrationally. But yeah, that's all it took was just a little bit more patience, a little bit of guidelines. And the next time he came back, we did use a muzzle and a long line to gain more distance.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, and that's what I'm glad you were able to recall like what actually happened because, and that's a good point too. Is when you're talking about negative reinforcement and pressure and things like that, aversive. Yeah, we have the what we see up front, which is the leash pressure, right? But you made a
Yeah.
good point. You're like what 6'1" or something like that.
That's 6 foot. Yeah.
Oh, okay, so 6 foot. All right, but still
Yeah.
considerably tall, bigger, whatever. And just the fact that you have to lean over the dog, the social pressure is there now.
Yep.
So you have even, you're intensifying the aversive potentially to the dog, and it's
Yep.
just a lot of things. So putting a chair in between you where you don't have the social pressure on top of the leash pressure, and now the dog has a little bit more time to think about it. And so in those instances, I've definitely used barriers before, and when I'm trying to teach
Yep.
other trainers the significance of what I'm doing and why this barrier is so important, yes, it protects me in the potential bite scenario for sure. But the other part is I try to tell them like one of the analogies I use is think about I give you a math test or I use math because I hate it, but something where you're required to use, a cognitive skill or whatever academic skill. There's a significant difference between me handing you the piece of paper, walking away, and you bring it to my desk when you're done, versus I give you the paper and I stand over you and I watch, right? You still have the
Yep.
pressure of time, getting the test done, but me standing over you doesn't help. Distancing myself and putting a barrier between us, allows you to think a little bit more critically and, you know, think through that pressure. And so that's the same correlation that I have with dogs when I do use a barrier. It's not just solely to protect myself, but it's allowing the dog to have some relief of other pressures or social pressure. So that's a good point that you brought up. I'm glad you touched on that.
Yeah. So that was definitely, I find with a lot of dogs who, you can call it fear aggressive or the similar issues that he has, that social pressure and distancing and just giving them the ability to think and kind of taking some of that pressure off is very critical. I
Yeah,
even think there's a few comments on that post talking about, oh, based off his body language or how close you were, I wouldn't have done that. And I completely agree. Like, once I saw where the threshold was, that's why we gained the distance and I took the route I did. I just didn't know to what extreme I could take it to prior to that, or how close or what the proximity was. So that was just to establish boundaries. Mm. Yeah,
yeah,
it was interesting, but I don't know. It's a good talk, like I said, and I've said this multiple times throughout the podcast. Now we really want to open it up. Like to hear from you guys. You can click in the Spotify link. If we posted this somewhere, we'll have it available where you can go in and check out the video and just kind of comment and let us know what you think. We're even going to put the video up with this audio over it, and I might even put like a question or a comment thing where you can just click on and ask questions or make a statement and just kind of talk a little bit. But I definitely want to open this up and keep the discussion going and make sure we're getting more on the same page with terminology and how we operate. Uh, but yeah, so that's just kind of my thoughts on it.
yeah. And I know we're gonna wrap up soon because we both got to get going. And but one of the things, one last thing that I wanted to touch on was you made this video a year and a half ago. You're, you know, putting it out now, obviously, and of course, neither one of us is the same trainer we were a year and a half ago. But and I think
No.
this is one of those things where, you're putting out disadvantages of social media. Like a consistent comment that I saw was, you should have used, an elevated position, safety equipment, things like that. Or if he's prone to bite, you shouldn't go straight to pressure and things like that. And for me, I appreciate genuine content where you're putting out things that you learned and showing like you making the mistakes and owning, like, yeah, of course I wouldn't do it now, but this is like
Yeah.
these are the learning curves that I went through. as a trainer, because I can talk about it or I can choose not to, but to see it and put yourself out there, is something way different. So, I guess kudos on that. And but yeah, that's huge, huge.
Yeah, there was even like in reference to that, if you go, I think it was actually posted before I posted the video of the Borble.
Mhm.
I even put out a video showing the safety procedures I have for large aggressive dogs now. Because there was a Corso that came in, he's about 140 pounds, very similar issues, but he'd already had an established bite history and shown that he was more likely to bite.
Nice.
And the process was completely different. Like the way I took everything, he came in day one. We did the evaluation, and I even do the evaluation process differently because now I know to be a little bit more cautious. And there's different signs I can look for that tell me what I need to know. But we went through. That dog is now able to go downtown on walks, enjoy, and go out. And he had the same issues. It took me longer, but I had a better approach to it, and I made sure my method and my plan for that evolved. But yeah, if you go check out that video, there's a whole like safety spiel. I talk about muzzles, back ties, making sure equipment's fitted properly. Like, yeah, that was a one-time learning curve. I used to always joke about just being faster than the dog. Yeah, I don't want to have to be faster. Like, I think I
Yeah.
talked about already with that month in February where I had all those dogs. I'm like, damn, one of them's gonna get me. I was like, I can't be faster than everybody every day. Like, there's no way. So safety procedures are a big thing for sure.
Hell yeah. Well, as we start to wrap up, because I know, like I said, we both got to get going. But
Yeah.
um, we've talked about this video, and that's pretty much been the basis. And we'll probably be about 45 minutes once this is done editing and everything. But of conversation, and that's only on 2 quadrants off of one video. So it gets a lot
Yeah.
deeper. But one of the things we got to get better at doing that, dude, and I'm dog shit at it. So how do people see this video? How do they find you?
Oh shit, that's a good point,
Yeah,
right?
see? Dog shit, dude.
All right. So if you go to Jonathan Moses Canine, all one word, on Instagram, I'll pin it to the top of my page since
Perfect.
everybody seems to want to say something about it. You'll see a Borble lunging on the end of a leash, but you can click right on it. Like I said, I'll have a link to it in the Spotify episode, or if I post it in a group, I'll put the link to the video as well.
Okay. And
Yeah,
Jonathan,
no, that's a
that's
good point, man.
Jon, right? Not John.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, JONATHAN, and then Moses Canine,
All right.
and it's
Full
I'll pin it to the
disclosure.
top of the page.
Full disclosure. Your
Go ahead,
name was saved as John in my phone for a long time, and then your wife looked at it and she was
bro.
like,
Every
that's.
time,
She's like, that's not how you spell his name, right? So it's like apparently not. And we had known each other for almost a year. But all right. Also, for people that are familiar with me, and I guess so I can get repetitions and plugging myself in, you can see it on my page.
yeah,
It's tagged, and I'll do the same. I'll pin it to the top of my page for a bit. But mine is Sean White, Sean White, K9, K with the 9, I guess. God, I suck at this. But anyways,
yeah.
Sean White,
Letter K,
K9,
number 9.
all one word. There we go. And you'll be able to see the video. And again, comment if you see other pieces of content. Scroll through it, comment, like, whatever you want to do. Share it, talk shit. We employ
Yeah.
it all. We just want to have a conversation. But all right, I think that'll do it for another episode of Working Dogs and Whiskey.
Oh yeah. All right, bet. All right, man.
Yep.
Here.